Hello, Philip Mazlumian here with you today, and I would like to explain why I believe we're entering a new economic recession. And how I'll be doing this is by focusing on what are called the three factors that make up an economy. I will be going through some leading indicators and validating my beliefs with graphs and figures from a variety of sources provided by governments from around the world. And frankly, I believe the outlook is not very positive, of which we could be entering not just a recession, but ultimately the greatest depression, more so than what we last experienced in 1929. John F. Kennedy once famously said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." It's a fantastic analogy in my opinion, but what does it mean? Well, I guess it's saying that we, the people, we're the boats, and the rising tide is in essence a prosperous society, economic and political institutions that are all heading in the right direction will carry us all to new heights. But I guess this begs the question, what happens if the tide recedes? We've enjoyed quite a ride since the Great Recession 2007-2008. We've had the longest bull run in history. Major investable asset classes have achieved all-time highs. You just have to look at house prices or stock market valuations to understand what I mean. To borrow debt has never been cheaper, with central banks offering negative interest rates on a quite a wide scale. So you have to really contemplate, especially if you're a business owner or an executive, has the success that you might have experienced in the last few years really been down to the initiatives of your enterprise, or is it the rising tide effect of the overall improving economy that you've been enjoying? But now a certain virus, which we will not name, has come along and burst the bubble. So are we really entering a recession? Personally, I believe, yes, we are. And I think we're actually going to enter the greatest depression that we have ever experienced. And I'm going to explain why using the three factors of production. So an economy essentially consists of three factors. They are households, businesses, and governments. So let's jump in and look at households. And effectively, households are the citizens of a nation coming together, working, generating incomes, spending their incomes, being productive members of society. And the country that I want to look at specifically is the USA. And here's a graph of their number of unemployed persons taken from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what you'll see in March of 2020, they had about 7 million unemployed. And if I'm correct, lockdown measures really only kicked off in about March. And then in April, look at the difference in people that have now stated themselves as being unemployed. A massive 23 million in April in 2020. That's a 230% increase in just 1 month. And so what I want to do now is give you some context. How does that compare to unemployment figures across American history? And the graph that you're seeing now is unemployment figures going farther back to about 1950. And what you're seeing here, this is the rise in unemployment from about 2008 to 2012, which corresponds with the last recession. And here is the massive jump in unemployment due to the lockdowns that we've been experiencing in the first quarter of 2020. And I'd just like to emphasize that the 2008 unemployment figures were spread out over a number of years. Astonishingly, the quarter one to quarter two unemployment figures have happened in a far shorter period of time. And at the time of recording, we are still moving through this process. And I fear that the unemployment figures are going to only be higher as more and more data comes in as the months and years pass. And this is not just a problem that's affecting the USA. It is a pattern that's being repeated globally. And what I've done now is taken some charts of unemployment figures from key nations around the world. And what you're seeing here first is unemployment from around 2020, that first quarter. And look at the significant jump in unemployment figures there. And the same is true for Australia, Hong Kong, and Canada. And you can look at many other nations to see similar trends. These nations are quite good at keeping up to date with their unemployment figures, but as we continue to move through the months, you'll see other countries updating their figures, and I'm quite confident we will be seeing similar patterns in their nations as well. So why does the mass unemployment across households lead to a potential recession? Within most nations, the lower and middle classes comprise the bulk of a nation's spending power, and as most of households within these brackets either are put under a furlough or are made redundant altogether, we see income disappear. Now, in most households, there are typically one or two people responsible for generating their income on a monthly basis. And of those one or two individuals, they typically only have one source of income, which is their job. So if this all dries up, naturally they begin to feel fear and panic, and they have to make some hard decisions about their spending. And what we see is non-essential spending stop so that they have more money to contribute to essential spending such as food, mortgage and rent payments, and so on. For households that do have savings, you will see over time that these savings, if they're not topped up, will eventually be depleted. But I think more importantly, we know most households have very little in terms of savings, especially not adequate amounts that can sustain these households through many, many months of no income. And then finally, you also see a rise in defaults on loans. So for households that have significant mortgages, car payments, credit card bills, and so on, there is a lack of income after all essential spending such as food and so on has been paid for. There is less and less income to go towards paying off these loans. And so unfortunately you see a number of households defaulting on these as times pass. So after households, let's look at the second factor in the economy, which is businesses. And again, I want to focus initially on the USA, and the indicator that we'll be looking at is the number of bankruptcies filed. And what you're seeing here is a graph of these bankruptcies, of which here is the first quarter of 2020, and you'll notice that bankruptcies have been on the rise after a period of decrease. But really, what we're seeing is a continuation of a trend that started around the first quarter of 2019. But what we have to remember is that only one quarter has passed and recessions are arising. And if we want to get an idea of potentially what we're looking at, if we refer to the last recession and look at how the number of bankruptcies grew over that period, it could give us a better idea of what is still to come. So that's exactly what I have here. You're now looking at the number of bankruptcies over a longer period of time, of which from when the beginning of the recession really started to by the time that it passed, look at the dramatic growth in the number of bankruptcies. And so I personally believe that as the lockdown continues as the consequences of our government actions to protect their citizens from a certain dangerous virus continue, we are going to see ever-growing number of bankruptcies being filed. Bankruptcies is one economic indicator that we can look at. However, there are a number of other indicators that share a similar pattern. If we look here, this is business confidence in the USA. You'll notice a significant drop-off in the first quarter. The same is true for both industrial production, again another significant drop. The same for manufacturing production. The rate has just fallen off the charts. And then factory orders as well. So across a number of economic indicators, we are seeing a severe decline. So why does business performance matter in regards to the potential outcome of a recession? Essentially, businesses stop selling and investing, not necessarily out of choice, but because customer demand disappears. If we go back, remember that households are seeing their income dry up. Non-essential spending effectively comes to a halt, and many businesses, their services and products can be classified really as non-essential. So what we see then is for a number of companies, their ability to generate revenue from sales, and then as a consequence, their profit margins significantly dry up. Now, as a management team, if you're beginning to notice a serious decline in revenue, you have to start taking some corrective action, and you need to reduce the burden on your company to help maintain and protect those profit margins. So one of the things that you can start doing is reviewing your costs and figuring what can be reduced. And for most companies, their labor force, their employees, make up a very large proportion of the expenses, their costs that they have to pay on a monthly basis. And this is typically why we see employees feeling the brunt of economic downturns, because businesses, again, they want to reduce their costs, reduce the burden to help protect those profit margins to be in line with the decreasing revenue that they're achieving. And this just leads into the earlier point in terms of households, where you create this negative cycle of households losing their income, less spending, less purchasing of products and services, and again, this forces businesses to lay off more employees and so on. In addition, growth investments by businesses stop or seriously decline as well. What I mean by this is that in addition to letting go of a number of employees and reducing costs in many ways, any expansion plans, any capital investments that companies were planning to purchase or acquire to help improve the revenue or the efficiency or the profit margins for their businesses, they realize that the economic outlook within the next few months or years is not really going to change. And so they put these investment plans on hold. Now, when they put them on hold, the jobs that could have been created as a result of this expenditure by companies doesn't materialize. And so job creation also disappears. So you have a number of people losing their jobs, and new jobs are not being created to replace them. Also, what you'll see is businesses that leverage credit, that have banking facilities, loans, and so on, as their revenue begins to drop, they also might be in a position where they can no longer keep up and maintain paying these financial institutions, these financial tools. And again, you'll see a rate in defaults. So now financial institutions are feeling pressure from the household segment, where households are not able to keep up with their credit arrangements, and then also businesses now are beginning to struggle keeping up with their credit arrangements. So now let's move on to the third factor of an economy, which is government. And the indicator that I will be focusing on is GDP, or gross domestic product. And the simplest way to think about this is that this is effectively the measure of a nation's income. All the transactions within a nation combined to reveal the income for that particular country. So in this case, the chart here shows the GDP for the last 3 years for the USA. As you're seeing, a bit of a negative trend since around 2018. Now, I'm just revealed the first quarter of 2020, and you can see the significant drop-off within that quarter. We're looking at an 87% decrease in 1 month alone, which is just staggering, and it shows you the collective impact that lockdown measures in the United States is having on the country's GDP. And as stated, this is not only in the United States. This pattern is being seen across the world. We have here GDP for the United Kingdom, again a serious decline within the first quarter of 2020. If we look at China, China has historically had relatively stable rates of GDP, and you can see a significant drop in the first quarter. Japan, also a significant decline in their GDP. And then finally, again, you can see a significant acceleration or deceleration in the GDP of Germany. When the lockdowns come to an end, shouldn't everything go back to normal? Yes, initially we'll probably see an uptick in economic activity, but ultimately the answer is probably no in the longer term. And if we just ask ourselves a few simple questions, the reasons why this would be the case will probably become more evident. So the first question being, who will hire all the unemployed? We know that bankruptcies are on the rise. Millions of small to medium organizations globally are going to close down, and it's these SMEs that employ most of a nation's workforce. And the larger organizations and the enterprise level organizations, these are the companies that have the ability to most likely weather this challenging time. They themselves are on a process of scaling and scaling down their operations to again protect those profit margins. So basically the end result is that you're going to have too many job seekers for the available jobs in the market. The supply and demand just doesn't match. So who can buy all the goods and services in surplus around the world today? We know that unemployment is on the rise, and this effectively creates many millions of households with less income. And these individuals within these households have to prioritize their spending, and that will first go to essential items such as food, rent, and mortgage payments. So this puts many thousands of businesses around the world at a disadvantage because they're going to see their sales and their profit margins decline as a result. So this forces a number of management teams to make some very hard decisions, and they will have to continue their reduction in employees as well as limiting and reducing the other assets within their business. And ultimately you get this terrible compounding effect, which is negative in nature, where supply and demand are just not aligned. And we have to reach this trough in the economic cycle where an equilibrium is met between what people can afford to spend and what is available in the market. Governments, in order to help alleviate the burden on households and businesses around the world, have been massively increasing their currency supply. However, this cannot be sustained for years at a time, basically due to their tax revenues declining as a result of the economic impacts. So as more and more households are furloughed or made completely redundant, tax revenue from this segment will drop off. And the same goes for business tax revenue as well, as more and more businesses suffer in terms of reduced sales and lack of trade. The government will not be able to generate as much tax revenue. Also, given the restrictions in travel internationally, and with the lowering of global consumer demand, international trade and the revenue that could be generated by governments from this will also begin to rapidly decline. And what you see, the cumulative effect, is that a nation's GDP will drop off, and this means that there is less money available in order to sustain any deficit spending, without significant impacts on the worthiness of their currency and on their bonds that they release as nations. And also, as a result, governments have to make some cutbacks, and a lot of nations, a lot of their citizens are employees of the government, and so as there is a crunch in revenues for the government, they too have to make cutbacks to their labor force to help reduce the burden. A famous quote by Walt Disney, he once said, "I've heard there's going to be a recession," and that he's decided not to participate. And this leads me on to my more positive ending, that recessions naturally create hardship. But as we've seen in the past, hardship has led to some fantastic innovation. And many brands and technological innovations have actually been developed during economic recessions. And these are just a few major brands that have been established during recessions and depressions in the last 100 plus years or so. So I would like to say thank you for joining me on this presentation. And please, if you got value out of what was shown here today, kindly subscribe, like, and share. It will greatly contribute to the success of this channel so that more content can be produced. Thank you very much.